What's the most insane coincidence you've experienced? My family used to take little summer vacations. One summer, I was about 7 to 8, we stayed at a campground about 4 hours from home. There were a bunch of kids there, and one day we all started playing tag. I was it, and was chasing another young boy, and when I tagged him, I pushed him too hard, and he fell and broke his arm. I remember the scene vividly. Fast forward to college. I became good friends with my neighbor in the dorm, and we ended up getting a place together our sophomore year. The following year, no longer living together, we went out for a few beers and the topic of broken bones came up. I've only broken one bone, and it was my arm, when I was 7. Some kid at a campground pushed me over while playing tag. It was me. Still can't believe it. No tag backs. A few years ago I into a cab heading out for the evening in downtown Toronto. Shortly after being dropped off I realized I left my phone in the cab. I tried calling it with no luck. I called the cab company, but because I had flagged the cab and paid cash they had no real way of knowing which cab I was in. I figured the phone was as good as gone and went about my night. Many hours later, and having moved around the city quite a bit I'm ready to call it a night, so flag another cab. Sitting in the backseat I start to think the driver looks familiar and realize that I'm in the same cab I took earlier. He hasn't found a phone, but I start looking anyways and sure enough there it is, jammed in the seat. Me and my flip phone were happily reunited, only for me to put it in a washing machine 2 days later. I was going to a My Chemical Romance and Blink 182 concert back in college. I went with a couple friends, and we got a hotel nearby Jiffy Lube in order to get plastered. I got some Wendy's on the way to the concert to eat in the parking lot beforehand, but left it in the taxi. I was drunkenly devastated. After the concert we hail a cab and I get in, feel a brown paper bag at my feet and look down. That beautiful ginger on the bag was smiling up at my inebriated eyes as if to say, I knew you'd come back. And yes, of course I ate it. An American friend of mine by the name of Tom took his family on vacation to check out Antarctica. He met an Australian guy named Paul on Christmas Day in Antarctica. They didn't exchange contact info. A year later, Christmas Day, they take their vacation to Machu Picchu. He is looking down at a map when he hears, "Hey Tom, how the hell are you?" It was Paul, taking his family on their annual trip as well. That's just next level stalking. I was once mugged by 4 guys on one of the main shopping streets of Nairobi, Kenya. One of the guys had me in a chokehold, and just before I was about to pass out, they dropped me and ran. At the time I didn't know why. 12 months later, sitting on a beach on an island in Thailand, I meet a British couple who did business in Kenya and we start to talk about how dangerous it was getting for foreigners. They described an incident the year before of turning a corner and seeing a white guy being mugged, and a shopkeeper rescued him by hitting one of them over the head with a bat. They were in the same street, on the same day, at the exact same time I was there. It was me who they witnessed being mugged. What are the odds of randomly meeting up on a beach in Thailand a year later? What's even crazier is that you met them and happened to have this conversation. My first semester of college, I moved out of state. I was first to move into the apartment and had a few days to myself. After orientation I found my new roommate sitting on his bed. When I introduced myself, he asked where I was from. When I told him, he said, "I used to have a friend named Simon." I said I used to have a friend named Will. We were best friends in 1st and 2nd grade until his family moved. How was the sex? When I was 11, I was in the park like half a mile from my house, and I was flying a Winnie the Pooh kite. I was the only kid around with a kite at the time, and I was pretty zoned into it and didn't notice when the string came loose. 100 feet of twine zoomed away and out of reach, and Pooh Bear was gone. Later that night, my family and I went out to eat, and when we came home there was a string dangling from the gutter above our front door. My dad grabbed it and started pulling. The string seemed to go all the way up into the night sky. We couldn't see the end of it. 100 feet of pulling later, there was my Pooh Bear kite. It came back to me. About 10 years ago I tried to get into Six Flags with a tiny keychain Swiss Army knife. It literally had a dull 1-inch blade. They told me I could either throw it away, take it to my car a mile away, or enter locker for like $10. So I decided to hide it in the planter. I looked down and saw a big piece of bark laying in the dirt and figured it would be a good hiding place. I picked it up and found another ducking mini Swiss Army knife. I placed mine next to the first and went into the park. When I returned, the other knife was gone and a smiley face was etched into the dirt in its place. Similar. I went to a concert in Dallas and took to lawn chairs. They wouldn't let me bring them in, so being 6 feet 5 inches I threw them on top of a very tall bush. No one would have even seen them and hardly anyone would be able to reach them. As I'm pulling them down after the concert, I pulled down 4 of the exact same chair I only brought 2 though. Up walks a guy who is as tall as I am, wearing the exact same Blink 182 tour shirt from 2009, and the other 2 chairs were his. It was pretty wild. We smoked a deep, did a tall guy high five, then parted ways. To those wondering, there is a special tall guy high five that only tall guys know. The club is pretty exclusive. As a college sophomore, I went on a trip to France by myself. I was sitting in Notre Dame Cathedral, listening to music, when a girl I dated in high school sat down near me, totally at random. We were both speechless when we saw one another there, out of the blue, in a foreign country within a vast cathedral. How was the sex? Shameful, I'm assuming. They were in a cathedral. Ooh, I had an even stranger one. We went on holiday to Spain and went to the beach. This was one of those sand beaches that stretches out for several kilometers. So we picked a random spot, and I went about 50 meters into the water, where the water was still waist high. I was talking to a friend of mine, and suddenly from 10 meters away I hear "Hey cone." In another country, in the damn ocean, I stumble upon my classmate. When I was a dumbass teenager in the 80s, we would drive around town at night in my friend's blue 66 Mustang and spray people with an old water fire extinguisher. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm selling a house. Our primary buyer, an older retired lady, backs out last minute. Our realtor drops by to tell my wife and I why. She explains that, while waiting our gate to be buzzed in, some teenagers drove by and shot the old lady with their airsoft gun. Damn. She then continues, "Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with kids. When I first came to America 10 years ago, we were sitting at a bus stop when a group of boys in a nice blue car drove up smiling. When they got closer, they drenched us with some water spray." I'm an American who moved to Amsterdam some years ago, and my first year there, on a random Saturday I decided to head out for a drink. Sat down next to a cute German guy who was in town for the first time from 6 hours away, helping a friend move kind of thing, and it turns out he's doing a PhD in physics. I'm doing mine in astronomy and have a physics background, so we spend maybe 10 minutes discussing our research topics when he mentions offhand how he used to study in New Zealand. I get a confused look and then get all excited. Johans. Prof WZ and M class in Auckland. First half of 2007. Freaked him out until I explained. I was a semester abroad student in Auckland that year, and not were we only in the same class, we even did homeworks together and such. But lost touch once I left the country, with no one having a clue what happened to the other. Only to randomly run into each other 5 years later in a random bar in a random city on another continent. When I was in high school, I was aimlessly playing around a library one day. Like any large public high school, our library had literally thousands of books quietly tucked away in shelves, and rarely, if ever, touched. That day I pulled a book at random from a shelf in the back, and sat down to read it. After opening it, a slip of paper fell out, and I quickly recognized the dashed 10 digits written on it as a phone number. I hastily read the number, and it was my older sister's number, who had graduated my high school years earlier. Someone wrote her number and tucked it away into a random book in the back until I found it years later. Maybe your sister's number was well known and located in over 50% of the books. I lived exactly a mile away from my now husband throughout our entire childhoods, teenager years and early adulthood, before we'd even heard of each other and met. What's even stranger is, when he was running, he'd know he'd ran 1 mile exactly when he got outside my house, and would regularly stop and time himself. He knew you. When I was 13, I was on a family holiday in Venice. We were on a gondola, Venetian punt boat, touring the waterways of the city. We got halfway down a long passageway, and another gondola passes us by, carrying a man and a woman, and the punter, The man and my dad lock eyes, exclaim one another's name, and have a quick handshake as our gondolas pass. Myself, brother and mother sit quietly, pretty stunned, while the woman on the other boat explodes with "What? Who's that? How do you know him?" We floated off in the other direction, comparatively swag and chill. Turns out it was a guy my dad went to university with, and hadn't seen him since. They haven't even contacted one another since. It's crazy they recognized one another, considering they were both in their late 40s now, passing fleetingly on 2 gondolas, in Venice. One time I parked, without even noticing, next to a car with the same license plate as me. I had her MA plate, she had her NH plate, both with the same 5-digit number. The weirder thing was that both of us had kept the plate as a novelty plate because the state wasn't making 5-digit plate numbers anymore, but a family member wanted to keep it. In my case, my dad wanted to keep his dad's plate. My uncle hired a car, didn't look at which spot it was in and just pressed the key to see what opened. He went up, and it was the right make, model and color, but an absolute tip inside. So he went back and complained, and the sales assistant took him out to a different car, exactly the same but clean inside. His key could open the higher one in some random person's car which happened to be parked in the same lot. My great grandmother fainted when my mother told her she was getting married to my dad, because my great grandmother had gotten engaged to a guy with the same name as my dad, and both men had been stationed at the same fort. But great grandmother's fiance died. Fortunately, mom's fiance did not. Or did he? Dun dun dun. I bumped into my dad at a brothel. I was there because I enjoy getting my balls beaten up. Not sure what he is into. He was probably paying your mom a visit there. Never could explain this payphone incident. Saturday night out with friends. We decide to call my friend Al to see if he wants to join us. This was in England long before mobile phones, so we had to use one of the iconic red phone booths. Someone was already using it, so we had to wait a few minutes. Guy leaves and we cram in the booth. Now, in those days, in order to make a call you would first get a dial tone, then call the number. When the person answered you would hear a bunch of beeps, at which point you insert the coins. So I pick up the phone, but hear no dial tone. I hang the phone up and try again. Still no dial tone. Seems to be still connected to the previous call. I say hello to see if anyone is still on the line. Person answers hello. It was my friend Al. He had just picked up his phone to make a call, and somehow, miraculously, without even dialing his number, we were connected. We all went to the pub after and tried to figure out how the hell this happened, but it remains a mystery. If I did not have my friends with me at the time as witnesses, I would have believed it was my mind playing tricks on me. I once burped 1 second before a power blackout on my neighborhood. It felt almighty. I sold my LSAT study books to a half-price bookstore. 2 years later, I found them on the bookshelf of the man I would later marry. I live in Australia and I have for almost my whole life, but I was born in Dubai. Every weekend in Dubai my mum would take me to the Hilton Beach Club and sit me in front of the pastry chef and eat. We moved away from Dubai really early on, so I don't even remember much. Fast forward to 17 years of age, a new kid at school had just moved from a nearby town. We became friends and we both loved cricket, and we practiced a lot together. My dad and I were giving him a lift home after we were practicing, and dad asks, "Where were you born?" And he says Dubai. And the conversation continues, and I say I was too, etc. Then he says, "My parents used to be the pastry chefs at the Hilton Beach Club." And this blew me away. Here we were 16 years later, halfway across the world, and every weekend I sat in front of his parents and ate what they made for me. To this day I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I mean, what other chances? So a few years ago, when I just became a bartender and was getting into the whole "oh my god, is it really that easy to get women's numbers?" phase, I ended up getting a girl's number on one night and another girl's number the next night. So go right ahead and start texting away with the both of them, blatantly using the same phrases, just changing out the names. However, come Monday morning the bomb drops. Turns out not do they go to the same university, but they're in the same year level, same class, and were currently partners on some sort of assignment. They were not as amused as I was. This is how the conversation went. Me, text to both girls, So want to get some ice cream later? Girl A, I don't know. Why don't you ask Chloe? Class A, hold a name. Can't remember for the life of me. Girl B, I don't know why. Don't you ask blah blah. Creativity is not my strong suit. Me, still texting both. Bring her along. We can make it a party. And then a couple of messages from both about how I'm disgusting, a loser, etc etc. But the story doesn't end there. Fast forward a couple years later, I'm at some restaurant with some friends, and we bump into a mutual friend of ours, and he's with a couple girls. We invite him to sit down with us, and we are all chatting away and happily making friends. I cozy up to one girl and we start talking and flirting a bit. Tell her I'm a bartender, and she laughs and says I'll never date a bartender because of this one guy that, and she just stops and freezes and looks at me. Turns out it was girl A, and not enough time had passed to heal this particular wound, and she got up and stormed off, never to be seen again. But wait, there's more. Fast forward about a year later, I go out clubbing, drunk off my face, meet a girl, we hit it off. Wake up next morning and lo and behold it's girl A, and she was still not as amused as I was about the situation.